Welcome to Malpractice Podcast.
So, are you ready to get started?
I am ready to get started. What you doing? How you been?
Okay, you already know that Corey's in here.
I already know.
My dog, everyone, is in the room because Michelle is not here. And how do I say? I have created a monster, and my dog loves me more than anything in the world. And so,
More than is healthy, really.
like it, yes. And so that's so true. So when I do anything, and she can't see me or I'm not there, she like kind of freaks out and whines, like perpetual whining. So
yeah, separation anxiety.
severe. It's severe. So you'll probably hear little rustling. She's like on a little blanket. She might go in and out. You might hear a little collar. Okay. Like right now she's exited the closet, but in a second she'll whine at the door. So it'll be just a cool, like, fun, like, tag you're it situation maybe.
Intermission type of break, yeah.
I did it to myself because I love her so aggressively that now she's like, oh, I love you aggressively. And I'm like, okay, but
yeah, it's
do
a
we
lot.
have to?
You two are a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole vibe. Eric says the same thing, though, about me and our cat Bubby, because he lays on me every night. He sleeps next to me. If I'm working, he's, like, sitting on my desk.
Yeah. He's a baby.
Like, trying to get on my laptop. He's a baby. He's just a little boy.
A little baby dog.
I absolutely love to hear people's, like, animal voice. Like, I always want to know what people sound like when they talk to an animal because everybody sounds different. I can't say that I didn't see it coming because you do love in a very aggressive way.
Yes, that's me. It's on my tombstone already. I've written it out. She loved aggressively.
Yeah. I feel like every guy I've ever dated has been like, Jessica loves you a lot. Like, I'm very scared of her.
That's because I hated every single person you've ever dated except Eric.
Except Eric, yeah. I'm like, you authentically should be a little bit afraid of her because she would not hesitate to murder you.
Sometimes bitches need to be murdered.
Sometimes it's got to happen. Allegedly.
I'm cramping right now. Mm-hmm. I don't care, listeners. If that's not something you want to hear, it's not something I want to experience. So
I straight up take a heating pad to work with me, and my predominantly male coworkers watch uncomfortably as I like stuff a heating pad down my pants and sit at my desk. They got nothing to say.
Good. They should have nothing to say. I am so uncomfortable and I hate myself. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if everyone else experiences this symptom of like self-loathing that I do. As soon as I start my period, I'm like, you fat motherfucker. Like, I hate myself. I'm bloated. I feel disgusting. Everything I do, I annoy myself. Like, I literally put a headband on. I was like, stupid. Like, I hate myself when I'm on my period. Yes.
I wish I could say that feeling was like monthly cycle dependent for me, but that's, I'm dehydrated at all times.
Yeah,
so
you
that
need to
helps.
Drink some fucking water.
I'm actually drinking water as we speak. I'm drinking whiskey as we speak, but also water. So
I'm drinking this new sparkling water from Heb. It's unsweetened with caffeine.
Love that. Love that for you.
Yeah, right?
Hydrated and intoxicated is what I'm going for most of the time.
Oh, I was like, no, there's no alcohol in this.
No, there isn't this whiskey, though.
I'm like not a fun time. So I'm like, ooh, can I have a coffee? And they're like, ma'am, it's 9 p.m. Are you okay? And I'm like,
all Jessica ever wants is a coffee, honestly.
I'm the person that, like, thinks that because I go out of my house, I deserve a coffee.
The best part of running errands with Jess, though, is that every time you get one thing done, she's like, do we deserve a treat for getting that done? It feels like we do.
We did a good job. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, we're hanging out. We went to the store. We should probably buy some sort of sweater. That feels
a coffee?
Right.
A
Oh,
slice of
I
cake?
will like, yep. Give me some sweets.
A sweater, perhaps? Maybe a scarf?
A sweater? Yeah, like I am the treat yourself generation. People are like millennials. I don't know. I'm like I did a good job today. Like I need that's me.
No,
I'm a
same.
treat yourself girl.
Yeah, it's reasonable. Love yourself, right? Oh, this is Malpractice Podcast, and we're your host. I'm Sydnee.
And I'm Jess.
We're here.
And we're here.
I just started reading this book that I really like, and it's called A Really Good Day.
That does not sound like a book that you would like.
No, okay. Well, let me tell you what it's about, and you'll get what I'm saying. The author's name is Ayelet Waldman, and she has like drug-resistant depression, so she starts microdosing with hallucinogenics. But it's like a really good book. It's about like she's very introspective. She like knows herself really well, and I just respect the shit out of that.
Okay. Well, we can trade these. I have a book for you.
Okay. Are you ready to hear this?
Yeah. I mean, I know a little bit. I'm
Okay.
excited. I'm excited because I know we're going to talk about like a really cool topic. And
it's super cool. Before we get started.
Oh, shout out to Kim. Shout out to Kim. She won our contest.
Oh, yeah. Wait, what's her Instagram handle?
Kim Murray 10. She has won our prize for telling me how
What's up,
brain
girl?
freezes happen. So that's cool.
Yeah. And for everyone, if you didn't see that post, basically she was saying that...
I have it right here. Once activated, the blood vessels drastic...
You got it.
Whoa, I can't read. The blood vessels constrict from the cooling to adjust to the drastic temperature change. Your body sends more blood to warm the affected area, causing the blood vessels to swell. It's believed that brain freeze, quote unquote, pain is caused by the constriction
What's
and
up,
then
girl?
the rush of blood.
Thanks for teaching us a thing.
Look at her. Yeah, a genius. And a dedicated listener, so we love Kim.
Thanks, girl.
Kim.
Yeah, we got a prize for you. We got some swag coming down the line.
We'll DM you your pricey prize.
Keep an eye out for that.
We do. I know we always say that, but we dead ass do.
We straight up do. It's coming. Okay, so before I get started, I'm going to issue to our listeners a potential trigger warning. This episode of our podcast is going to contain references to and stories about death and suicide. And if that's something that may be traumatic or triggering for you or difficult to hear, please feel free to skip this episode. We want our listeners to note that we would never, ever encourage anyone to end their own lives. But today we're going to have a discussion about compassionate end-of-life care, especially for those who are terminally ill. Okay. The first thing I want to do is ask you, what do you think you know about Dr. Kevorkian? Like, when I say his name, what is the first thing that you think of?
Murder.
Yeah.
Murder. Translate that. Right. He was murdering people.
Okay. The short answer is technically yes, he was convicted of murder.
Yeah. That's why I know. That's why I think that, because that's the conviction.
Yeah, it's technically true. The longer answer to that question is what I'm going to cover today. So this is a really interesting case, and it has it all. It has doctors, court cases, murder, drama. I'm going to tell you and our Mal pals all about Dr. Kevorkian and physician-assisted death. And before I get started, I know this topic seems really dark, but we're going to hear about some very interesting patients' rights advocates who have a super unique perspective on a person's right to die, especially at the hands of a skilled doctor. So, Dr. Kevorkian was born Murad Jacob Kevorkian on May 28th, 1928, to two hardworking Armenian immigrants who actually fled from the Armenian genocide of 1915. Making their way to America in hopes of a better life. His father worked at an automobile foundry and his mom stayed home with the kids. He decided very early on that he was going to go by the name Jack, so that's what I'll call him for the rest of the story. although many will later know him by the title Dr. Death.
So his real name was Murad?
Murad?
I would change my name too, probably.
Changed it to Jack. And then I don't think he chose Dr. Death. I think that was somebody else. Okay.
I would like to go by Jack, but like my nickname, maybe Dr. Death. I don't know. Just you see how you feel.
I'm just tossing it around. You tell me what you think. First of all, have you ever met anyone who gave themselves a nickname? That'd be the douchiest thing to do in the whole world.
I'm trying to think. Like, do I know an asshole? I mean, I probably know.
You probably know someone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, sorry if I just offended you, but if you gave yourself a nickname, woof. Okay. By all accounts, as a child, Jack was like totally brilliant. He was basically a child prodigy. During middle and high school, he taught himself German, Russian, Greek, and Japanese.
Wow.
His parents were pretty religious, but because he had heard about the horrors that his family had escaped in the Armenian genocide, he completely decided by the age of 12 that he didn't want to follow a God who would allow these things to happen, and he just completely stopped going to church.
Heard that.
And he was
Just
really
kidding.
smart as a kid.
I don't know.
My God. Heard
that.
I mean, do you, dog?
Yeah, exactly.
He was actually so smart as a kid that he was often ostracized and kind of teased by his peers. He didn't really fit in. He graduated from high school early with honors, and then he ends up going to school and then later to medical school at the University of Michigan.
Boo. Boo. Go green.
Your dad's gonna love that.
That's for you, Dad.
After he graduated in 1952, he decided to do his residency in clinical pathology. So what's weird about that is that pathologists rarely ever see living patients, and they mostly deal with tissue samples for diagnostic purposes. So most of what they do is try to figure out what disease a patient has based on samples they get from primary care doctors. They're also often responsible for autopsies and handling dead bodies. So many say that this was the start of Jack's fascination with death. So that's where it starts to get weird.
Great.
According to several sources,
It's already kind of weird. He changed his
It was
name.
already a little weird, but it's gonna take a sharp turn. So, according to several sources, Jack is asked to leave the residency program that he's in because of some real questionable ideas he brings up at a conference.
What did he say? What's weird?
Okay, so you're basically he gets on stage at this national conference in Washington, D.C.
I'm so nervous about what he did.
in 1958. And he basically just tells everyone that he thinks that the medical community should start performing experiments on convicted inmates who are about to be put to death via the death penalty.
Well.
And everyone in the room is completely outraged. And he's like, well, I think it should only be people who consent to it, but still.
That's crazy. Okay, so that's crazy.
Yeah.
But.
It doesn't sound great, though.
I
you have
hate
to
that
admit.
Everyone was like, no, it sounds crazy, but me knowing all this shit in the background, I'm like, okay, all of y'all were doing some variation of fuckery at that time.
Lots of them were, for sure, yeah.
Maybe you weren't standing on a stage and saying, tap, tap, tap on the microphone, like, you guys, I got this crazy idea.
Yeah.
But you were definitely doing some crazy shit.
Yeah, but he's like, excuse me, I think we should change the policy so that everyone can do this. So it was a lot, for sure.
No, I'll say he's like front of the list, crazy town. But everybody else is already in line,
Yeah,
too.
sure.
Like, none of these people are without some sort of blame.
He's the mayor of Crazy Town. There's some citizens in the audience, I'm sure, but he's the mayor.
Right, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad that when I hear stuff now, I'm like, well, I've heard crazier shit. It's like, I heard about a murder castle, like, I don't know. Like,
That's true.
It just feels like everything is fucking crazy.
It is, yeah. And it doesn't stop with him. So basically, his idea is that he would, like, put them under euthanasia and experiment on them until they died.
What the fuck? Okay.
Right.
He was like, he pulled out a chart. at this conference. Is
Correct.
What you're saying. Okay, well, he did a lot.
So instead of using approved methods like lethal injection and things like that are like proven to be painless, he's like, yeah, I think we should just, they should be able to consent, but then we just experiment on them until they die. So sounds like a lot.
That is a lot.
And basically at that point, the University of Michigan was like, nah, that's not cool.
That's a lot. And that's like, whoa, woof.
Right. And they basically gave him the option. They were like, you can either kind of back down on this idea and like issue an apology, or you can leave the university. And he chose to leave.
He was like, I will not apologize.
Oh, he talks about that one for the rest of his life.
Really?
He's like, I still believe that. Like he became like a practicing doctor and he was like, I still think I was right. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Experimenting on someone until they died feels like you're dabbling in like Nazi scientist territory for sure. You're tiptoeing. You're dipping your toe in.
Yeah, you're definitely doing that. You're sitting on the edge, dipping your toes, refreshing your toes in the water.
Of torturing.
Nazis,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So after he leaves, he gets hired as a pathologist at Pontiac General Hospital, and eventually he becomes the chief pathologist at Saratoga. God damn it.
Sarasota.
The chief pathologist of Saratoga General Hospital in Detroit in 1971.
Oh, damn. Detroit.
During this time, he was doing some pretty strange experiments of his own that were not approved, I'm pretty sure, where he was collecting blood samples from recently deceased patients and giving the blood transfusions to volunteering hospital staff.
Wait a minute. Wait.
Yep.
So he's taking blood from recently deceased people and putting it in live people who agreed to it.
Who work at the hospital, yes. Like doctors and nurses.
Doctors and nurses?
Orderlies, anybody who would agree to it, yeah.
All right. He must be a convincing motherfucker. Are there recordings of him talking?
Yes, there are. He actually does an interview on 60 Minutes that I'll link to, because he's a very interesting guy.
Oh, God.
Like, there's all of this. Okay, so basically people say that he's like witty and personable. His friends and family say that, right? But some of the people that work with him kind of painted a different picture. They say that he's like kind of grim and a little morbid and awkward and unpredictable with like a really quick temper.
Sounds like it.
But basically everybody across the board agrees that he is really driven and he's ready to have everyone know his name one way or another. He's excited about the idea of like becoming famous. He never dated. He never got married. Despite the fact that he was a doctor, he would like wear clothes until there were holes in them. He avoided all luxuries of any kind. He drove like an old beat up Volkswagen van.
I've never actually seen one of those that didn't look like a creepy thing.
Yeah. He didn't even eat like indulgent food. Like he would restrict food that was like too luxurious. So yeah, he's like living like a monk. It's very interesting.
Why? Why?
Doesn't really say why. Just that's what he thought he needed to do. Because I love me a chocolate something.
You know I do.
Okay.
Don't even play around.
So then in the 1980s, he briefly quits medicine altogether. He moves to California. He tries to produce a movie that fails.
Oh, God.
And then he starts writing essays in these obscure German medical ethics journals about euthanasia. And I won't read them to you guys, but they were pretty bizarre. He is, however, becoming really passionate about a patient's right to die in a way that they have control over. And then in 1984...
Well, it just seems like he wants people to die.
Right. So he's kind of morose and kind of weird, right? And people around him even said that he was maybe obsessed with death.
Maybe. Maybe he was.
But that was his vibe, and it kicked off like a really interesting conversation here in the US. So in 1984, the reinstitution of the death penalty led to a rise in executions in the United States, and Jack comes back around to that idea that he never really gave up on, which was experimenting on prisoners. Members of the California legislature even invite him to discuss a bill that would enable death row prisoners to volunteer to die by a doctor-administered overdose of anesthetic allowing them to donate their organs, because if they go through lethal injection like the normal way, they're not able to donate their organs, right? But if they were just anesthetized to death by a doctor via like euthanasia, then they could donate their organs. And so some members of the California legislature invited him to come talk about that.
That sounds okay.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. Okay, so after he talks to the
I think
California
that's
legislature, everyone in his life describes this event as like a turning point for Jack because he was totally energized by the attention that he got from lawmakers and from the media. And so he travels to the Netherlands, where physician-assisted suicide of terminal patients was already practiced. And it isn't technically legal there, but it is tolerated by the law. So it's not like they necessarily allow it, but they're not stopping people from doing it.
That's weird. That's a weird thing.
And so during this time, Jack starts learning about how to help patients end their own lives without facing criminal charges.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And so while all of this is going on, and honestly still to this day, there's a lot of debate about a patient's right to end their own lives under the supervision of a doctor. And there's lots of different...
Right. I just saw a movie about this, actually.
Yeah, it's a super interesting idea, and there's lots of different, like, ethical positions to consider. So doctors basically take an oath to, like, do no harm, but what about when patients are, like, suffering and terminal? Well, Jack Kevorkian is likely the reason that we're still having the discussion today, because his next step was to get very involved with advocating for and performing what is now called death with dignity.
Wow.
So
that's like
about
a good slogan, though.
Yeah.
Like, that PR person was on point.
On point, yeah. They have a lot of, honestly, like, heavy hitters on their side who are, like, really backing it. Like, lots of doctors back it, lots of legislators and things like that. So
Yeah.
about a year later, Jack starts advertising himself in the local newspapers as a physician consultant for death counseling for any patient who wants to end their own lives. So the only thing that's problematic for me about this particular part is that he has no formal training in, like, depression or grief counseling or psychiatry, psychology, or, like, anything close to that arena.
That's interesting how people always believe they're qualified no matter what. Well, some people anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that's like the kind of person who puts, like, CEO of Living My Life on their LinkedIn. Like, shut up. Like, did anyone actually go? Probably yes, because people are stupid.
Despite his lack of formal training, people start going to him to ask for his help. The first patient ever to come to him for assistance was a woman named Janet Adkins. She was a teacher from Oregon who had been diagnosed with, like, early onset Alzheimer's disease. On June 4th, 1990, Jack helped Mrs. Adkins end her life on a bed that was laid out inside his Volkswagen van, parked in a public park near his home. Yeah. So as soon as she died, Jack called the police and informed them and told them what happened, and they arrested him and detained him. But they're like, we have no idea what to do with this, because she had written out a suicide note that her family had. She had a lawyer sign off on her last will and testament. Like, they were very prepared, right? So the next day, Janet's husband and son call a press conference where they read the suicide note that she had prepared, and they even thanked Dr. Kevorkian for letting her die on her own terms. And one of the key ways that he prevented himself from being criminally liable for his patient's death was by not actually killing them. So he let
So how would we do it?
Yeah, he let them make the final decision themselves. So he's, like, very obviously trying to make this, like, easy to publicize, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he develops this machine that he calls the Thanatron, which literally means death machine. And basically he would inject an intravenous solution that started with a saline drip, so like a normal hospital saline drip.
Yes, I'm familiar. Grey's Anatomy. I'm a professional.
Right. And he would hook it up to this death machine, which he actually built on his kitchen table with $30 and some scrap metal.
He was the first DIY
guy. Authentically. He was MacGyver. He was MacGyvering stuff early. I was like, what is that guy called? So basically, this machine would allow patients themselves to flip a switch, that would introduce a dose of thiopental with a 60-second timer that would put them into a deep coma. And when the timer went off, a lethal dose of potassium chloride would be automatically injected. And that would basically stop their heart in minutes, causing a heart attack while the person was in a deep coma.
So it's not painful.
Right. Scientifically, the whole process is allegedly painless. And he called it a dignified, humane, and painless way that the patient can do it in the comfort of their own home anytime that they want. So he would sometimes use the death machine, and then he would sometimes use a mask that he basically put over someone's head. And it would kill people by introducing the gas carbon monoxide, right? Which is also allegedly painless. You kind of drift off to sleep and then you die.
Yeah.
So at this point, people start traveling from all over the world to use his services. Over the next 8 years, he claims that he would help over 130 people end their own lives.
Damn, a serial killer.
Right. But he didn't do this without drawing attention and significant backlash. As you can probably guess, people were not stoked about this, especially because at the time, especially in Michigan, there were no laws about this. And so they didn't know how to handle him. They were like, is he killing people? But the people want to die, but there's no law supporting it. There's no law against it, technically, because the people are killing themselves. Like, they're the ones flipping the switch, right?
It's probably like, what is it that you can get charged with when you, like, assist a death?
Yeah, so eventually, after his third assisted suicide, the state of Michigan revokes his license to practice medicine because they're like, you need to stop because we just don't know what to do with you right now.
Like, can you pause, motherfucker? Can you pause?
Right. They're like,
we need to figure out what you are.
At this point, they haven't arrested him or, like, charged him with anything, but they're like, just stop doing it until we can figure out what to do with this. And so prosecutors and state legislators spend years trying to stop him because they're like, we just need you to pump the brakes until we can figure out what to do.
And he doesn't
about
want
this.
to, right?
Right. So he keeps helping people while all this is going down.
Wait, they took away his license and he's like,
yes,
anyway,
kept doing it.
Mind your business.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. That is some confidence right there.
There's a lot of confidence in the situation. Yeah. So in 1993, Michigan approves a statute allowing assisted suicide. The statute was declared unlawful by a state judge and the Court of Appeals, but in 1994, the Michigan Supreme Court ruled that assisted suicide, while not specifically prohibited by any statute, was a common law felony, and there was no protected right to suicide assistance under their state constitution.
I mean, that's just, they literally did that so he would stop.
Right. They're literally stopping him. Yeah. This is like, no one else is doing this at the time. So they're literally just stopping him. So then he gets arrested the same year that all of this is going on. And they're like, hey, okay, it's illegal. You have to stop doing it, right? They're like, now we have a law against it. You have to stop. So he does it again. And in 1993, he gets arrested. He gets released. And then hours after he gets released, he helps in the death of another patient, a 30-year-old man with ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, right? So he gets taken into custody again the same day, and he goes on a hunger strike and basically just refuses to eat until he's released. So they lowered his bail down to $100, and they're like, go ahead and post bail. Just please don't kill yourself in here. Because he basically demonstrated that he was ready to, like, starve to death. He was like, I'm not eating until you let me out.
Mind your business.
So at this point, Jack is basically a celebrity, and police and lawmakers hated him, but the media is, like, obsessed with him because every time he makes one of these big appearances, he's totally putting on a show.
Right, because he's loving it. He's living his best life.
And nationally, he's sparking a massive debate about the issue. So every newspaper is publishing stuff about him. 60 Minutes has him on. Like, it's a big deal. And everybody's asking the question, do patients have the right to end their own lives in a dignified medical way? Because you can always commit suicide, right? But they're like, is it fair for patients to ask for it to be in a controlled medical environment, right? So, between 1994 and 1997, Jack stood trial 4 times for the deaths of 6 different patients. He was acquitted from 3 of those, and then the 4th one ended in a mistrial. During these trials, he would show up to the courthouse in, like, homemade wooden shackles with, like,
Okay.
with a homemade like ball and chain around his ankle. So this dude is loving the media attention, and he is absolutely hamming it up for the cameras and the people like watching
What
at
an
home.
ass hat.
Yeah.
A literal ass hat.
I feel like by the end of this, you're going to be really torn on whether you like him or not. He went ahead and opened up a suicide clinic in 1995 in Springfield, Michigan.
Poor Michigan's probably like, can you go anywhere else?
Yeah, honestly, they were probably like, get out of here. His first client at the new practice is Erica Garcelano. She's a 60-year-old Kansas, Missouri woman with ALS. And so after he assists her with her passing, the building manager kicks him and his business out of this suicide clinic that he's been operating, right? So shortly after, a group of doctors, researchers, and other medical experts in Michigan announce their support of Jack's cause, and they tell state legislatures they plan to draw up a series of legal guidelines for what they call merciful, dignified, medically assisted termination of life.
Okay.
At the time, most of the doctors surveyed actually backed the idea that Jack was practicing. He had a ton of public support, and unfortunately, it made him feel kind of invincible. So he's doing all this stuff, he's hamming it up, and while the trials are going on, he keeps assisting more and more patients in ending their lives, right? While basically thumbing his nose at the legal system that was completely unsure of like how to handle what he was doing. So in March of 1999, after a trial that lasted only 2 days, a jury ends up finding Jack guilty of second-degree murder.
Yep.
And in this case, he had actually videotaped himself injecting a man named Thomas Uke, who chose to end his life after years of battling ALS. He then proceeded to send the videotape to 60 Minutes, who broadcast it nationally, right? Like broadcast someone dying
Damn.
on air. So it was like a big deal, and everyone in the nation starts talking about it, and it sparks a massive national debate about medical ethics in a way that had never been so publicly visible. And when the judge handed down his sentence, she said, "You had the audacity to go on national television, show the world what you did, and dare the legal system to stop you," said Judge Jessica R. Cooper.
Damn. I mean, yes, that's my vibe.
She said, "Well, sir, consider yourself stopped." So Jack, unfortunately, and this is what I mean when I say he like was feeling kind of invincible, he decided to represent himself at the trial, which is obviously super egotistical.
I have never heard of someone representing themselves at trial that I was like, I like that person. Never.
The only
never.
other person I can think of is Ted Bundy.
That's exactly, and I'm like, well, like I've never heard of someone and their whole story and they like represented themselves at trial, and I'm like, you know what? A winner if I ever heard of one. No, I'm always like, what a piece of shit.
It's usually people who think they're really hot shit.
Yes, they think they're smarter than everyone.
So in May of 2011, he was hospitalized with liver cancer. He served 8 years of a 25-year prison sentence after he got convicted of first-degree murder in this trial.
Good.
In May of 2011, he was hospitalized with liver cancer and late-stage kidney failure after suffering for years from an illness that he kind of hid from the public. So he died in the hospital on June 3rd, 2011. Friends said that toward the end, he asked others to mercifully give him the same option that he had given so many others, a painless and dignified death on his own terms. Laws in place at the time kept anyone from giving him that opportunity. As he lay dying, the nurses played recordings of Bach in his room, and friends and supporters sat with him. His tombstone reads, "He sacrificed himself for the rights of others." His quote...
Who wrote his tombstone?
He gave this quote, though, that I really like. He said, "My ultimate aim is to make euthanasia a positive experience. I'm trying to knock the medical profession into accepting its responsibilities, and those responsibilities include assisting patients with death."
I just don't like him. I think, like... He's a piece of shit. I think he just wants to kill people, and he masked it in like the prettiness of like, well, I'm helping everyone. That's what I think.
Maybe. I mean, he definitely seems like he had weird issues surrounding death. I think he probably should have taken some like counseling courses before he did this, but what do I know?
Yes, definitely.
What I will say though is that all of this sparked this massive debate because people had never really, I mean, I'm sure they had thought about it, but there were never really any like public forums about it. There were never laws being passed about it and things like that. So the last thing I want to talk about is where we are with physician-assisted death laws in the United States today. There are 8 states as of right now that have death with dignity statutes, meaning that about 20% of the American population lives in a jurisdiction where they can legally ask a doctor or healthcare worker to help them die. What I will say is the majority of people who request a physician-assisted death actually end up withdrawing their request because it's part of the physician's responsibility to tell them about all of the other alternative options.
Yeah.
And so some of the things they learn about in palliative care is that it's designed to minimize suffering. They offer things like death counseling for you and your family, as well as drugs that assist with pain and anxiety. And they do everything they can to minimize suffering. The American Medical Association has this to say about the division that people still feel over the issue. Thoughtful, morally admirable individuals hold diverging, yet equally deeply held and well-considered perspectives about physician-assisted suicide. Nevertheless, at the core of public and professional debate about physician-assisted suicide is the aspiration that every patient come to the end of their life as free as possible from suffering that does not serve the patient's deepest self-defining beliefs. Supporters and opponents share a fundamental commitment to values of care, compassion, respect, and dignity. They diverge in drawing different moral conclusions from those underlying values in equally good faith. So while many believe that it fundamentally goes against the Hippocratic oath that a doctor swears by and their role as a healer, other medical professionals and supporters have placed calls to lawmakers in an effort to develop thoughtful research protocols to help patients who want to end their own lives. So what everyone can agree on both sides of the issue is that the way that we deal with terminal illness in the United States is completely abhorrent. There's a huge body of like first-person perspective literature that's really interesting where terminally ill patients at the end of their lives have aggressive, painful treatments pushed on them by medical staff who are following protocols. And in those protocols, basically the idea is that death is always the enemy. And sometimes these treatments go beyond what's compassionate. And sometimes, to me, I think what is compassionate is allowing someone to die with dignity on their own terms.
I've been really quiet because I'm like, what do I think about this? Like, I literally don't feel like I can have an opinion about it because I have no experience with this. And maybe, you know, if I do one day have a friend or family member who wants this, then I'll have an opinion. But right now I'm just like, doesn't feel like my space, like my place, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know. I feel like a panel of doctors should make the rules about it and they should give it to the legal people. And then the legal people say, gotcha. That's what I feel. I also think
like not just doctors, like people who specialize in grief and dealing with death, you know, there's lots of people who have made this their like whole life's work. So
I think Grant works with hospice and like I mean, I would literally be like, whoever's in charge of like policy for hospice should be involved in this. Like,
absolutely.
Like those people know what the fuck it's like.
The idea of getting just like a really robust perspective from lots of people who like work intimately with this kind of thing, like that's who should decide these things.
Yep, 100%. And patient advocacy groups.
Speaking of patient advocacy groups, there are a couple of really cool organizations. One of them is called Death with Dignity, and the other one is called the Final Exit Network. And they support people that they call exit guides, who sit with people who have decided to end their own lives because they kind of believe that no one should ever die alone without like a compassionate friend next to them, right?
That's good. Yeah.
So they go through an extremely rigorous process to ensure that the patient's mind is made up, including a series of like educational interviews and discussion with someone who has experience with the field. They require that patients are mentally competent and able to carry out the final act themselves. So they have to be able to, push a button and do it themselves. They basically sit with the patient and act as like a compassionate patient advocate. They offer grief counseling to the patient and to their families. And they collect extremely detailed information about the patient's last wishes. They create a discovery plan so that when the patient's body is discovered, it's done quickly by someone who cares about them, basically.
That's good. Good vibes.
Yeah. What's interesting is that many of these exit guides are on FBI and police watch lists.
It's because no one's on the same page, right?
Right.
And they're going to keep
exactly.
doing it. So we need like a moment.
Yeah.
So that someone makes a decision and then we follow whatever that person says.
Yeah. And in the meantime, many of these exit guides have been arrested. They face criminal charges, and most of them keep doing it. The Final Exit Network has been prosecuted legally. Regardless of how you feel about it, and regardless of how you feel about Jack Kevorkian, it is completely undeniable that he was the one who kind of sparked the entire right to die movement that is still, alive and well today.
I wish he just wasn't such a prick about it.
Yeah, he was really in your face.
He kind of made it about him instead of, like, he literally has. It definitely feels that way. To be famous.
I can see that. Yeah. I think he definitely was like hamming it up a little, I think he liked the attention. Yes. I think he was hamming it up. I think he enjoyed the press, right?
He sent a video of himself injecting someone to 60 Minutes. Like, you're not in it for all the right reasons. There might be some other reasons, but your number one reason is you want to be famous.
Yeah, I can kind of agree with that. And so I think, what I will say is he's maybe not the best like face of this issue. Because there are lots of really passionate, like, patient advocates who are still fighting for the cause.
Yeah.
But he's a really interesting and, like, recognizable name, and he is the one who, like, kicked all of this off because these conversations just weren't happening before him. Regardless of, which side you fall on, to me it's an issue of, like, autonomy, of, like, making a choice for yourself. And all of our lives are defined by the choices that we make. And this particular conversation is about whether or not people deserve the choice of a peaceful, painless death on their own terms. In the case of, suffering terminally ill patients, the jury is unfortunately still out about whether they have that right.
You can say no, and people are still going to do it. So you might as well do it, make a safe law about it that is agreed upon by medical professionals and advocates, because you're just going to make it unsafe. Like, people are going to do what they need to do to bring themselves peace. Like, that's what's going to happen.
Absolutely. I totally think that that's the case.
Well, thanks, Sydnee. That was hard, probably, to prepare. So
it was really hard. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. It's one of those things where I'm thinking about the end-of-life decisions that people I know have made, and it is, it's a really heavy topic, for sure.
Yeah. Actually, y'all, let us know what you think. Like, I'm very curious about where people stand on this.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to fight anybody because I don't have an opinion on it. I really want to know what our listeners think.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear it.
I think we should reach out to the patient advocacy networks because I think they're going to have the resources, and experience to have this conversation that I want to learn more. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good idea. There are lots of, like, those exit guides go on and do interviews and stuff all the time. So that would be a really cool idea. I'd love to hear from them.
Thank you so much, Sydnee. I literally have never, I can pretty much say this with confidence, never in my life have I been like, I don't know what my opinion is.
I was honestly surprised. I had a very good, not a good time. That's a weird thing to say. It was very contemplative for me doing the research.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think we've all benefited from this because this is I just really am going to, really think about this.
I'm really interested to hear what our listeners have to say. We'll have to get some feedback on this one and see what they think.
Thank you so much.
Glad you liked it. Hey Mal Pals, thanks for listening. The sources and links for this episode can be found in our show notes. If you haven't already, go follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Malpractice Podcast. And just as a reminder, if you like what you're hearing, you should definitely subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And don't forget, malpractice makes perfect.